Hello, hello, hello.
Oh, hello, hello, hello. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing just fine. Talking about I don't know if you're watching a stream or if hold on, I can share my screen so that you can see what I'm going over. But yeah, just looking at some amazing comments by Justice Thomas Alito about the decision for like the Supreme Court precedent for gay marriage. Which so far is going wonderfully. I was basically talking about the idea that like they are making like a pretty common conservative appeal to like this idea that like the court shouldn't be like a vehicle for being able to achieve civil rights reform,
hmm
when that assumption rests on the idea that like the legislature, which is what they would propose an alternative, is actually performing in the way that it's supposed to, and like
hmm
literally, um, like I would say that the federal legislature is kind of broken, right? Like a prime example is the fact that we literally like if people wanted like all of BLM to be satisfied and for most of the protests to like end, then all that they would need to do is like pass a meaningful police reform bill, and they can't even get that right? And the idea that like they would of their own volition pass a meaningful reform on like LGBT rights and recognition is just kind of laughable to me, right? And so, like, if we're in a society where we recognize that, like, this fundamental premise of the logic that, like, we should resolve to the Supreme Court, or that we shouldn't resolve to the Supreme Court as a means of being able to achieve, like, civil rights for oppressed minorities, is that we should be able to go through the legislature, then, like, that requires on the legislature actually functioning, which it just kind of doesn't.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. No, it's been broken for a long time. It passes very little like meaningful legislation. Even when like the you've got united three branches of Congress. Um, I guess the thing. So I was reading it, and the thing that really stuck out to me is they suggested that I think that their potential solution to that was to argue that it should just simply be remanded to the states, that the states should be handling this. I don't know if remanded is the right word there. You're the legal scholar, but
It would
um,
basically, yeah. Well, I mean, like remanded would be like if the case went to a Supreme Court, then well, remanded would be like if you have a case that went to the Supreme Court on a specific challenge, and then it would be like it would go back to like the trial court level, right?
mm,
So like this wouldn't be remanding in the way I think that you're talking about it. It would be more like they would defer the issue to like regulation by individual states.
well, that was their argument, and it was actually striking to me because Amy Coney Barrett said more or less the exact same thing in a speech she gave, that she wanted like gay
Mm.
rights to be a states issue thing, and so that I think is actually kind of frightening because it does suggest that there is that these three SCOTUS justices are already all on
Wake
board
up,
with like
liberal.
striking it down
I
at the
love
federal
you.
level and arguing that it's one, a violation of religious rights, which I think is absurd in the example of Kim Davis, who was just asked to sign a form, and two, that they want to give it back to states, and like a third of the states, a half of the states aren't going to pass it. Um, so pretty
Totally
frightening.
get that. Now, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with Kim Davis. Can you explain a little bit about that?
She's the Kentucky, I think Kentucky court clerk, I want to say, who was asked to sign a same-sex marriage. I don't know the exact name of the form. After Obergefell v. Hodges, I think, and um, she rejected to it because she argued that she had a First Amendment religious right not to sign the form. And I get that sometimes the United States has like a extreme view on like religious rights, on like what people are allowed not to do if they have like a religious objection to it. But simply
Mhm.
like signing a form for the it's only like 2% of couples actually that are in the United States that are like homosexual. So for like 2 in 100 forms that you're gonna see, just signing off that like yeah this couple is fine or whatever, just seems like an incredibly minor violation of religious rights.
Yeah, and I mean like I think that's entirely reasonable. I have to do more research, and literally, I'm right now taking constitutional law
Oh
for
no.
individual liberties. Yeah, I know, right? Right now, we're in a lot of like disparate treatment under the 14th Amendment, right? So
hmm
like equal protection and all that. But I mean, like from what I understand, usually a lot of the precedent as far as like religious liberty goes to the idea like religious liberty, like just because like something is something that like is considered like a religious belief to you, that
hmm
isn't a full stop ability to be able to do whatever you want under a religion, right? Like
No,
if
absolutely
you
not.
believe, yeah, like if you are, like if you belong to like the church, like if you're like if you belong to the Church of Satan and you genuinely believe that you need to sacrifice a baby and eat the baby in order to be able to like perform your required religious service, well, I'm sorry, we're not going to allow that because you're literally asking to like be able to sacrifice a baby to be able
Well,
to fulfill
and
your religious service, right? Like it usually like usually restrictions come up, and there's like some variation here, but usually restrictions come up where the practice of a religion or the enforcement of religious values would result in the impairment of someone else's fundamental liberties, right? Usually that's where the line is drawn, more or less.
And the only other distinction that I've seen, so it generally, I agree that they do this like rights weighing sort of thing where they say like, your religious rights have to be weighed against other people's rights, or two, they have the argument that occasionally the state has such a what's the word, like not quite incentive, but like need to do certain policies that it's okay to override religious rights for like public safety or public I think there's this like case, I want to say in Florida, that voodoo practitioners were sacrificing animals, and the state of Florida.
Yeah, I've studied this case. I've heard of this. I think I studied it in undergrad, but yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I just, as I understand it, the state of Florida argued, or state or whatever it was, argued that it was like a public health issue, that they were slaughtering animals, and I forget if they were eating them, but it was like a public health issue, and I forget what the ruling was, but like to me that seems like a fairly reasonable argument. I don't know about the specifics of sacrificing animals, but in general, like if part of your religion were like putting poison in the well water or whatever, that would probably not be a reasonable exception to like everyone else's right to clean water.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, and that's I completely agree, right? And it goes back to this idea, right? I don't know. I always like I tend to base a lot of like my perceptions of like a lot of like my basic analysis for like larger like legal issues and whatnot around like the John Stewart. I know that. All right, before I say it, I know that John Stuart Mill is like controversial and wasn't exactly like the greatest person in regards of like race and feminism and all that, or like treatment of gender. Yeah. Okay. Listen. But like the one, like I will die by the principle of like the harm principle that he put forward. Like you should be able to do in a free society whatever it is. You should be able to do essentially. Yeah, essentially that doesn't hurt someone else, right? You can do whatever you want in a free society up to the point where it infringes on someone else's ability to do the same, right? And like here, like if you want to practice your religion, if you want to like I don't really care up until the point where it infringes on someone else's ability to be able to enjoy their life to the fullest, right? And so like that's
kind of the issue with the gay marriage thing, right? Because it's like a form. This is actually something that was very similar in Obamacare. There was I want to say it's like Nuns of the Poor or something had this case against Obamacare where they argued that even signing the form on Obamacare that they didn't want to provide contraceptive services was a violation of their religious rights. And so you just have these incredibly minor, like you're talking about seconds out of someone's day to sign these sort of forms that mean nothing, I'm sure, to their actual religious beliefs or actual religious practices. But just because they think, they like argue that it again is against their beliefs, they would like meaningfully tear out a significant part of someone else's life, like the ability to marry or pursue their own reproductive ends.
Yeah. No, and I totally get that. Now, also, I want to return to like the specifics to like what Alito and Thomas said, right? Because like, mind you, like I think that these like the broader principles stand true, but also as far as like just their basic legal analysis. I mean, like I'm able to contribute a little bit, but also like other people have written and responded to this, and like there's this cool article that was published in the Washington Post, written by someone just like looking at like the legal arguments, kind of divorced from like the personal feelings of the author. And literally they said, the author said, it was an odd document, referring to like one of their dissents, right? Not a dissent, just a 4-page grumble about matters that may someday be a problem depending on the facts of unknown future cases. The justices might consider woodworking because from the looks of this, they don't have enough to keep them busy. The statement, which carries no legal weight, is essentially a cry from the hearts of behalf of Americans whose religious views condemn same-sex marriage. Fair enough, the freedom to hold beliefs different from those on the mainstream is a cherished aspect of American liberty, but the statement crosses into sophistry by suggesting that religious liberties are somehow infringed if they aren't privileged above the civil law, right? Like literally, like yes, they are Supreme Court justices, but like these kinds of arguments literally have like no legal weight or authority on them. Like the best they could do is say that like the court shouldn't be used as like a means for like achieving like civil rights ends. But even as we discussed earlier, like that kind of rests on the principle that the legislature is actually working like it's supposed to, and it just doesn't. Like it just doesn't right now. It's basically impossible to be able to pass like any meaningful civil rights bill, and to say that like it would be actually possible to be able to pass something through the federal Congress the way that is, I just think it's ridiculous.
Well, I just think it's interesting. There's this broader conservative argument that we don't live in a democracy, and that there's like these big fears about tyranny of the majority, right? That you need to like protect the rights of the minority against the rights of the majority.
Just so fucking all right. Listen, if that was actually the argument, all right, if we actually wanted to protect the rights of the minority, all right, like I'm pretty sure that LGBT people are not in the majority. All right, like let's be fucking clear. But sorry, go on.
Well, I guess it's just interesting, right? Because on the one hand, their arguments are really stringent that we should protect minorities even when the majority says that something is wrong with it. But conversely, you get cases like this where actually, well, I think we have to go through the electoral process, right? It's wrong for the Supreme Court to decide that certain people's rights need to be upheld, even though the majority has chosen not to act on it, right? So I just think I understand that maybe Alito and Thomas don't specifically believe these arguments about like rights of the minority and electoral arguments, but just in the broader conservative push, like they'll defend the Electoral College, they'll defend the Senate, and they'll defend it because they think it protects the minority, but they absolutely will not protect the minority because they think that states need to vote to protect the gays.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it is inherently contradictory, right? It's. I was actually talking about this the other day with someone when we were talking about basically originalism. I think it was when I was reviewing Ben Shapiro, right? Because like I think that a good example is like when I was reviewing him, he was specifically talking about Amy Coney Barrett, right? And he was talking about on one hand, it would be very good to promote or to have her, like one of the better qualifications for her in his mind is the fact that she is a quote unquote originalist, that she literally clerked for Scalia and kind of takes the same interpretive views that he does. And so in his mind, that's like a good positive quality for her nomination. But then he literally, in the same breath, talks about the fact that she's willing to stand up for more conservative values and fight for things like abortion and healthcare and all of that, right? And it's like, Ben, that's literally advocating for partisan politics in the Supreme Court, which is explicitly the thing that the founders, like that the people who wrote the Constitution were trying to explicitly advocate against. Like, if you want to talk about originalism, that's like as originalist as you get, that no one wanted any partisan politics in the Supreme Court. That's why we have lifetime appointments. And so when you're literally talking about, oh, it's good that she's a good originalist, she's just like Scalia, but then like simultaneously say that you like her because she's going to advocate for partisan ideas, I think it just kind of shows that you don't really care about originalism, but rather just like when an originalist framework, it's just like you care, like the better way to say it is that people who are more conservative who like originalism when it happens to confirm their ideas or their biases. That's what they mean, right? It's not that they like originalism. It's that they like the framework when it confirms what they want.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm sure that this is not just a conservative thing, that they'll tend to like institutions that favor their ideas when it favors them. This is like a everybody thing, but it is just particularly funny in the context of like conservative moral values, which are often supposed to be like universalist and posed in the context of like God-given rights. Whereas at least the liberals can say some dumb shit about like, subjective values or utilitarianism and weighing rights or something.
Yeah, no, it is very interesting.
The Supreme Court.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say the Supreme Court thing is. Have you seen any of like the proposals to reform the Supreme Court? Actually,
I've seen like some of them. So I know that there was like one Supreme Court proposal. I know that there's some people talking about like adding more seats to the Supreme Court. I know there are some people who are talking about like limiting the amount of years that someone can serve on the Supreme Court. All of which are fine. I'm not sure if the adding of the seats will do much other than just like resolve a short-term problem, which is like the fact that we're going to have a supermajority in the Supreme Court. But like otherwise, I kind of like the idea of year limits, just because like again, like the reason why we have lifetime appointments is because originally we wanted to believe, like the founders basically believed that like that the Supreme Court was going to remain as like a nonpartisan institution, as basically a check on other institutions in the government, which we just know to be like fucking false, right? Like we know that that's just wrong. Like, 100% dead wrong, right? They basically just like, all right, now executive branch, we're gonna rely on you and your good faith, being the president, to not abuse the fact that we're gonna give you basically complete authority to be able to dictate who goes into the Supreme Court. You better act on your best behavior. And pick just the people who are most qualified, regardless of their partisan views, which lasted all of fucking never.
I think it lasted for literally 8 years. Like the meme is that parties formed as soon as George Washington left office.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And so it's like, so it's like, I think that like if we try to just keep pretending that the Supreme Court isn't partisan, because like let's be clear, it's totally partisan. It was 100% partisan. All right. Yeah, it's 100% partisan. I think that if we try to tell ourselves otherwise, it's just lying to ourselves, right? And so we can either like completely, it's either we can just keep ignoring it, or I mean like, hey, we can all just like be honest about it and reform it accordingly. If we're going to appoint partisan Supreme Court justices, cool, there are probably other problems with it, but like let's at least have policy that's reflective of that understanding instead of just pretending that's not the case, right?
I mean, I totally agree. I guess so. there are like kind of two things that I think is interesting. Like one is that I really dislike politics that relies on like the personal health or well-being of a person. Like I think it's really kind of messed up that we have to rely on the personal health of like Donald Trump to lead the nation, or Biden, or whoever. It should almost not matter that they are the president. And so something that bothers me just about Supreme Court is that it often ends up being the people served till the end of their life. And it really, as far as I'm concerned, politics shouldn't have anything to do with people's personal health. And so one of the proposals I thought was really interesting, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but as I understand it, circuit courts, I think, pick like 3 judges out of the pool of judges randomly and assign them to a case. Is that correct? Or is there another procedure? And if you don't know,
usually, so what happens is when we're talking about like cases, right? So you have like different levels, right? So if we're talking, all right, so it also gets complicated because we can like there's different like court levels or court systems for like state and federal. Sure. Talking like federally, right? And both have
federal circuit court, yeah.
Yeah, so like the federal circuit court, what you have is like usually what will happen is that they will take appeals from the various district courts that comprise their circuit. And so what you have is like when cases are appealed to the circuit court and the circuit court accepts those appeals because they have discretion to be able to deny certain appeals. So when they accept them, you will have a case brought before like a panel of judges, right? And before the panel, people make, usually it's arguments based strictly on the interpretation and application of the law. It's very hard to get like cases which like appeal based on like the merits of a case, like the fact finding feature of a case. Like usually as a rule of thumb, like courts will give like a lot of discretion to lower, like appellate courts will give a lot of discretion to the lower courts as far as like the fact finding feature of the jury. This is just kind of like a legal fiction that we assume to be true, that if you put like 12 people in a jury and we ask them to determine fact, that whatever they find is we just kind of assume it to be correct, which is why jury trial is so important. But yeah, so like whatever jury finds is usually kind of settled. Whatever people appeal, it's usually that they will appeal before a panel of judges that like, listen, basically what happened was that at the district court judge, the district court judge basically just read the law wrong and came to a wrong decision, or improperly applied it, or the jury improperly applied it, and we're coming to you, circuit court judges, to basically like hear our arguments about like how actually it should have been applied and to get the case overturned or remanded or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I don't know. It's complicated.
Well, sure. So I guess just to focus in, how is that panel selected? I guess that was the original point of the
question. How are the judges selected? I'm trying to remember. Usually I believe they're appointed, for the most part. They're either appointed, sometimes they're elected, but it's very rare that like judges are elected. Usually they're by and large just appointed by the executive or the federal government.
So perhaps I was wrong then. So my understanding, I guess I had read this or believed it, but maybe in falsehood, that like the panel of judges, you'd write the arguments and then the panel would be selected afterwards randomly. And I guess I was just appealing to a particular reform that I quite liked, which was the suggestion that you should have, say, like a 9-person or 15-person Supreme Court and just randomly select it out of all of the people who are in those federal appeals courts. So in general, on average, you tend to have a court that's about as conservative as the average judge in the federal judiciary, rather than relying on any particular justice over time to like carry that ideology forward.
It's definitely interesting. I don't know. I mean, like, again, I have to see what you're like the source of what you're talking about. But generally speaking, That's how like most federal court judges, especially circuit court judges, are like found. Like most of them are appointed. But yeah, like when we are like the idea that like basically the Supreme Court would be like rotating based off of like who is serving in circuit courts, like that could definitely be fine. Like a lot of people who are appointed to circuit courts, usually that means that you have like a decent amount of experience. Like people who are appointed generally like have a decent amount of experience in knowing like how to like that. That's supposed to be how they're appointed. I don't know. Like, there's also probably a lot of very fair criticisms that like Trump has appointed a lot of like very conservative, basically just like pro-Trump kind of justices. That might throw that kind of assumption out of whack. But like for the most part, usually like circuit court and district court judges, especially like federal judges, are like supposed to be like decently knowledgeable about like the law. I say supposed to, but yeah.
There was an interesting. So I've been reading a little bit into judge selection. And so something I thought was interesting is that as you moved down the scale from partisan elections to nonpartisan elections to, I think they're called merit elections, where like a judge is already selected into a position and you simply vote to reelect them, and finally to lifetime appointments. As you move basically from the scale from like maximum partisanship to lifetime appointment, a variety of studies seemed to show that lifetime appointed judges generally tended to be more respectful of minority rights. They were
Really?
more in favor of like their legislation tended not legislation their decisions tended to be more in favor of like LGBT and like black groups.
It's interesting. So, all right, now I'm caught in the bind because then do we prefer lifetime appointments or do we prefer? I mean, like, I guess I could see the reason why if it's like people would otherwise like be willing or wanting to. Like, I guess here's the reason why, right? Because like there is like the positive policy purpose for having lifetime appointments is that judges don't have to worry about like making decisions that would reflect badly
Mm-hmm.
on them in terms of like voting or elections or whatever.
Like their career
Like
is over, right? Like they've gotten the
yeah,
final shot.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So they don't have to worry about it. So like people don't necessarily have to feel as much of a sting when they decide positively in Supreme Court cases or in like civil rights cases, right? But I mean, like that cuts both ways, you know. Like if you have
It does mean they
someone,
could oppose something that was very popular, as it were, right? And like just do it
yeah,
in opposition.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like that does cut both ways, right? It just means that there's no accountability beyond like from that point onward, right?
Sure.
Whether it's like being accountable to a population that doesn't want civil rights reform or a population that wants to keep the laws on civil rights that they have already,
Yeah.
right? Like yeah, so like it makes sense. But like when we're talking about people who are appointed who are like pretty explicitly against civil rights, I feel like you know that argument kind of sings. I don't know. Like it's one of those things where it's like it works well when it does, but you just got to be careful because you can end
I
up in a
suppose
really sticky situation.
we are literally in the same position that we were just talking about Ben Shapiro, right? I favor this institution because it supports my my ideological views, but it might not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. No, that's exactly what it is. And so I do want to be like I do want to be critical of that perspective, right? Because like on one hand, like yeah, it might support us in the short term, but in the long term, we can end up in situations like where we are now, where we're literally facing down the barrel of like a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court majority. You know, yeah, very frightening. Anyway, I don't know. Or sorry, go on.
But if you wanted to end off there, that's fine. I just wanted to ask, I guess, like, what are your thoughts on that 6-3? Like the original question was, I guess, about like just the grumbling of the conservative Supreme Court justices. But what are your thoughts on like the Supreme Court process as it's currently going?
On the like the process, I don't know. I feel like it's fundamentally.
I'm not necessarily the process, but just like if it is a 6-3 court, like what's gonna happen? I guess is do you think what like
Well, I mean, like originally, I was gonna say that probably they would probably go after they're going to go after abortion. I feel like that's pretty definitively on the chopping block. Unfortunately, like that's an issue which still does not have like whereas like gay marriage, even though I feel like after what we just reviewed, they might very well go after gay marriage, right? That's something which has a lot more widespread support, and I feel like it would be very hard to get like you know like there's just like it's one of those things where it's like it was decided, like it was only decided in 2015, right? Like that's when Obergefell v. Hodges was, right? But like even just since then, like public opinion just shifted so much. I feel like it would be bad strategy. But hey, given this, they might still try to do it. But even that being said, right, I feel like it's pretty likely that they're going to go after abortion. Basically, as soon as it's brought up, they might go after Obamacare or whatever is left of it. As soon as it's brought up. Trying to remember the original. I think that the original case that addressed Obamacare was like United States v. Sebelius. I saw you that in Con Law 1 last year. It's an interesting case, but yeah, like it's one of those sad things. I remember my con law professor actually telling me that like the thing that they overruled it on was or that they like got rid of parts of Obamacare on were basically the idea that like oh, I'm trying to remember the exact arguments. Don't quote me exactly on this. It's basically the idea that like since they tried to take a lot more nuance of an approach compared to like something like single payer option for healthcare. That like it imposed basically like an opt-in, like a coercive opt-in option for various states, and it was overturned at least in part based on like that coercion. Whereas like if they had just done like a straight single payer healthcare plan, it probably wouldn't have met those same constitutional challenges, which is kind of ironic that like the medium, like the compromise that Obama tried to make in passing like the Affordable Care Act actually ended up making it more objectionable under Supreme Court precedent. And if he had just tried to go for like single payer healthcare, probably would have been. There's no guarantee that would have like stood up to scrutiny, but like at least based on how the case was ruled over, it probably would have been able to stand up to like the specific objection that it got, right? But like yeah, so like Amy Coney Barrett, bringing us back in, has said that she disagreed with how that was ruled. They'll probably try to take it on at some point. And yeah, I don't know, take away what little. Again, like I'm not saying Obamacare is perfect, but fuck, it's better than something, or it's better than nothing, right?
I mean, yeah, it's better than not having like pre-existing condition protection. Absolutely.
Yeah, I know, right? So yeah, like I'm very not optimistic for it. I think that the best like strategy that we have going forward is basically just like make sure that like first vote in Democratic Democratic House and so like House and senators, right? Make sure that they're able to pass laws which do not face constitutional challenges. And then appoint as many lower court justices as possible who basically like the name of the game is basically going to be keep laws from getting into the Supreme Court, right?
Right.
Yeah, like that's going to be the name of the game. But unfortunately, yeah, like that's where we're at.
So is there, I don't want to like ask you to advocate for anything that, I don't know, eventually down your career could get you in trouble or something, but like, do you think that stuff like packing the court or other strategies that are kind of beyond current norms are like acceptable to solve this kind of thing? Like, in other words, are the only things that we should pursue as like lefties or Democrats or whatever is just like try and prevent stuff from getting to the Supreme Court, try and make laws watertight, or should we do anything more?
Well, I mean, like, I don't know. We already do pack the like. Everyone is talking about like, oh, we should avoid packing the court. Like, people have already packed the court, right? That's literally what we're having now. Like, we're gonna have a 6-3 supermajority in the Supreme Court, right? Like, we already do pack the court.
Packing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, like, I don't know, like people are gonna like complain about, oh, they're packing the court, oh, they're packing the court. All right, well, like that's the name of the game. Everyone does it. All right, like don't morally impugn people for literally doing what's necessary in order to be politically relevant, right? I think it's just kind of hypocritical and ridiculous. That being said, like what else can be done? I mean, obviously, I'm only gonna advocate for people to be able to pursue like things through. Maybe I'll context here. When so this is completely unrelated to the discussion at hand. In a couple of years, I'm going to be taking the bar, and part of taking the bar is I'm going to be going through a character and fitness evaluation, where basically like there's going to be a board
to watch 4,000 hours of your streams.
I mean, listen, I have no idea, but it'll be certainly interesting to see. I mean, like all it takes is a clip, right? And basically like they are going to look and see if I have done anything that would be, it's like a pretty vague determination, right? But certainly they're gonna, like, one thing that they look for is to see like if people advocate for others to violate the law. And if they were to find a clip of me where I advocate for people to violate the law, then they could take that as reason to not bar me. So completely unrelated to the subject at hand. Definitely just a random happy fact. Now back to the discussion at hand. I would never recommend for, like, obviously I'm only going to recommend for people to go through like legal channels and legal means to be able to achieve, appropriate ends. But as far as like strategies like packing the court, like people do that already. I think it's just kind of stupid when people like morally criticize or morally impugn others for doing it, because it's like it's already done, right? Like I don't think like it's impugning that is the same kind of thing as like how Democrats broadly treat Republicans. Like Democrats always try to do the, we'll take the higher road so that, they will as well, or we can try and incentivize them to as well. But like Republicans don't care about like being morally consistent. They just care about winning. Which honestly, I don't know, in a way is admirable because they are winning, right?
Yeah, at least they're consistent.
They are consistent in only doing things which serve their own personal self-interest.
Well, I don't want to take too much of your time. If I guess if we're getting to the end of it, a book recommendation would be How Democracies Die. I forget the authors, but it's an examination of like kind of the breakdown of democratic norms, particularly in, I want to say, I know it's definitely South America. I don't remember the other continent that they look at. And one of the big things they find is that when you have like norm breaking, which is what we're currently seeing in the United States, it tends to go one direction, the other, and then the other, and on, and then the system devolves. It's particularly likely in systems like ours, which have a presidential system and like Supreme Courts and like these kind of very centralized power, and parliamentary systems are much more robust to it. So we have like particularly poor institutions for surviving these sort of democratic norm breakdowns. So good read, kind of sad, but.
Well, yeah, it is a little sad, but hey, more knowledge is better. That's what I told the last person, Katie Montgomery. So yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for coming on. Do you want to shout yourself out and tell the audience a little bit about who you are and where to find you?
Sure. I'm socialism to the left. I got a YouTube, a Twitch, Twitter, all the usual things. I'm probably to the left of RGR. I'm a socialist, but I'm also a reformist. I'm also not going to do anything that would get me disbarred, though I'm not going to be pursuing any of that, I suppose. That's about it. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on. I thought it was a super good conversation. And yeah, I really appreciate it. All right. I'll talk to you later, all right?
Thanks. Have a nice evening.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Good God, talking is rough. Okay. All right. Why is there so much stuff in chat? All right, let's read backwards first because the people at the bottom are most likely to still be here. Obergfell v. Hodges. Are you making fun of my pronunciation? Fuck you.